The World Economic Forum wants children microchipped. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of people. Hello, John.
Hello, sir.
Well, we're back again talking chips.
Indeed. There is, we've had a very strong reaction to our last show, and I've had a lot of correspondence in the last few days since our last show about Suncorp and their communication about microchipping. So I thought it'd be worthwhile to come back to the audience because I think we've got a couple of new things to say. So there is some new information about Suncorp that I think is worthwhile to share with our audience. But also we have, in the last week, a publication by a author on the World Economic Forum website talking about the microchipping of children, and that is of deep concern because it looks like there is an agenda by elitists in this country but around the world to take society in a particular direction, and that direction hasn't been fully laid out and debated and sought the mandate of people like you and me. And that is obviously a concern because prior to 2020, we had a number of assumptions about how this country worked. And then obviously in 2020 and 2021, those assumptions were just shattered by extreme power grabs, secret ministries, totalitarian policies. And for a lot of people, they have suffered financially, emotionally, mentally, physically, etc., because they were not prepared for the changing nature of society. And so I think it's worthwhile that we explore these topics in depth, so that if we don't want to head in this direction of microchipping, whether it's adults or children for whatever purpose, we collectively say to the power brokers that be that this is just not on.
And I just want to go back to my parable of the frog again, the idea of you sort of sit there in cold water and then slowly turn the water up and the frog doesn't notice until it's cooked, right? Because it's slow and steady over a period of time. But there's a whole bunch of things that, you could argue are out there and it's being sort of filtered through and sort of becoming sort of mainstream without people realizing what it really means.
Indeed.
And that's the problem.
Yes. Now, one of our viewers, who is a Suncorp customer, after our last show, took it upon themselves to write to Suncorp and said, what the hell did you guys do? And so Suncorp actually sent a response, which was an apology. So we actually have this, and I think it's worthwhile to just quote from this. It's a bit lengthy, but if we put slide 1 on the screen, Martin. So this is an email from Suncorp on Monday of this week, following the publication of our last show. And this is what this Suncorp customer service representative had to say. Quote, "We value your feedback and we are sorry for any offense you may have felt after reading the article about microchipping, which was included in our monthly Term Connect newsletter. The article was written to present facts around where technology could be headed and included both the pros and cons of this possible future. Even though the article appeared on our website, Suncorp in no way endorses or promotes the practice of using microchips. In this article was simply shared for information purposes only. On reflection, we appreciate how this topic could be viewed as insensitive, and action has been taken to remove the article from our website and YouTube. We hope that our action to remedy the situation reassures you of our commitment to serving our customers, and that we are listening to your concerns and taking appropriate action as required." So that is a full back down by Suncorp. But the interesting thing with this email, Martin, is that they're pretty much saying that they had a neutral position about microchipping, yep, and that they in no way did they endorse this. Well, I mean, one thing I must say is that on such a controversial topic, I find it fascinating that a bank would try to stimulate debate on something like this, given that in my view it's not core business. But the other thing is that and I'll let you jump in first. But this issue of they had a neutral position, I take issue with that.
Yeah, well, if they had a neutral position, and knowing how controversial the issue was, why would you go near it, right?
Exactly.
Is there some agenda that we don't know, but in the context of some of the other things we know around the world that's happening with the use of microchips, maybe it's not quite so neutral as it might first appear, and maybe it's a little bit of let's see what happens. Also, it's worth underscoring, the negative reaction they got, not just from us, but from other places too. I happen to know a number of other people who reacted very negatively to the email that went out to a number of Suncorp customers. And in fact, they took the page down before we made our show. So they'd already got the negative reaction. They'd already had significant, reaction from a lot of customers saying, "What are you talking about? Why are you talking about this?" So very interesting that that's actually how they've dealt with it. And also make the point that the apology came from a pretty lowly source within Suncorp. It was a digital value specialist. It's like sort of down there looking after the web. Right, so it's not like it came from the executive team. So I still have the question: did the executive team know? Is anybody in the executive team at Suncorp going to stand up and actually respond to what they've done and explain why they did it? I would love to see that.
Indeed, and the one thing I will say, Martin, is that obviously I'm aware that certain customers close their accounts or can't cancel their policies with Suncorp prior to our show, but I have been led to believe that some of our viewers who are Suncorp customers have decided to take their business elsewhere. So,
well, they've actually said so on our chat. So we'd assume perhaps they followed through on that. So yeah, it could be quite interesting.
Indeed, but if we can go just to slide 2, Martin, because I think it's worthwhile to go back to see what did Suncorp actually tell their customers. So this is again the mass email communication from the 12th of August of this year. So they said, quote, "Technology follows us everywhere nowadays. What used to be a phone attached to the wall is now an entire universe in our pockets. Considering how much closer we are with technology, it makes sense for the next step to be keeping it inside our bodies with microchips, right? To learn more about the future of human microchips, its benefits and risks, click below." So the only thing I have an issue with that quote, Martin, is so when it says it makes sense for the next step for the chips to be inside our body, that to me doesn't sound like a neutral position. That seems like an editorial position by Suncorp, because they're saying it just makes sense that we should be doing this. And so for them to now say, well, no, we're just here to stimulate public debate, even though it's not core business, and we never endorsed this, we never promoted this, and we never sought to cause offence. I find this a very hypocritical position, if I could say so.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I don't think we've heard back from the Banking Association, right? So far as I know, that they've got no position on this either.
No. Now, the thing is that I'm fascinated to know if our viewers have received any further communications either from Suncorp or any other bank, because I know that some of our viewers contacted some of the other banks and said, don't dare do this. So if anyone has any information about what their banks or other companies have responded in relation to this issue, feel free to send any emails or communication to my email address. So we'll just put that on the screen, john@adamseconomics.com. And obviously I want to sort of see what are the other banks saying. Has Suncorp said exactly the same as what we've been told in terms of this one viewer? Does Suncorp have a new updated message? So it'll be fascinating to see how this is to evolve over the next little while.
Absolutely, and we'll wait with interest, John. We'll wait with interest.
Indeed. Now, Martin, moving on. So we do have a new microchip scandal, and that is that there is a technology futurist who wrote a piece on the World Economic Forum website, and this was published last week. Now, it was brought to my attention in the last couple of days because Zero Hedge actually had an article about it, and obviously Zero Hedge is in a lot of ways to our type of thinking, and they were quite alarmed that the microchipping of children would be entertained, but obviously, because it's the World Economic Forum, some people said no surprise given the other controversial ideas that forum is pushing. So if we put slide 4 on the screen, so the article is, the title is called as "Augmented Technology Can Change the Way We Live, but only with the right support and vision." And here is the controversial quote from that article. It says, quote, "The limits on implants are going to be set by the ethical arguments rather than scientific capacity. For example, should you implant a tracking chip in your child? There are solid, rational reasons for it, like safety." Now, Martin, I have 3 children. I find no basis, no rational or solid reasons for why I would want to chip my children. Now, if I want to know where my children is, I actually be a responsible parent, and I go chase them wherever they are, so I can keep my eyes on them. And obviously, over the last few years, I've kept a hawk eye with my wife to make sure that the children don't go into a dangerous situation and they hurt themselves accidentally. So I don't think we need to microchip children to make sure that they don't get lost or they have an accident in the playground or whatever the case may be. So again, these types of ideas, and the way, this is the biggest concern I have, Martin, is these ideas are being presented in a way like it's like a fait accompli. I mean, it is so obvious. There's no need for in terms of debate. So when Suncorp says, that it's just the natural evolution that we have chips in our body, or this author says it's just, there's a solid rational reason for why we want to chip our children. Again, they're not saying that this is controversial. It requires further examination. They're just saying, that it just makes sense to do this, and that we should just lay down any concerns and just move along with how technology is taking us. And that is the dangerous thing, because these elites, whether in our country or overseas, they need to hear from the general population that no, these are not fait accomplis. There are significant issues to be debated and discussed, and the population at large are not going to accept these without proper scrutiny, and that there has to be a solid public policy case to be put forward for us to accept anything remotely along these lines.
Yeah, and again, it's just worth underscoring, isn't it, John, that a lot of these ideas are coming out from non-elected, think tanks and well-funded ideas machines, but actually they don't have bottom-up buy-in. It's being dictated top-down, as many other things are. And as we made the point the other day, what tends to happen is that those sort of top-down ideas then get infiltrated into the minds of those in power and in government, and they sort of just assume that it's the way to go. There has to be a better way than that.
Yes, and I'm glad you articulated it the way you did, Martin, because I think that's how potentially the $10,000 cash ban happened. We have overseas jurisdictions in Europe doing this, and no doubt there would have been policymakers in Australia saying, well, what is where is policy going on physical cash? We see what the Europeans are doing. We're going to copy the Europeans, and they just thought, well, it is what we're going to move with the times. And then obviously when it came on our lap, we just said, I don't think so.
Exactly. And by the way, there's an RBA paper out on cash in Australia. We'll probably come and do a separate show on that because it's just come out. But it's very interesting that they've made some big assumptions in the way that they've articulated the role of cash into the future, which, again, I think we probably would question. So.
Yes, and like just to, if we could deviate a second, I mean, the biggest concern is with some of these high-paid bureaucrats is they think that they are the font of all knowledge and that they determine the future rather than actually realise that the whole notion of public service has been lost among these in these ivory towers, so that they should realise they're serving us and that they should be seeking our consent on these ideas rather than just assuming the future of cash or the future of microchip is going to be this way, and people will follow the in terms of the directions set by the elite bureaucrats and politicians.
I'm going to give you one other example, John, that came out yesterday. The RBA gave a speech yesterday about climate change.
Yes.
And in that speech, they said, well, we're in contact with our global peers and, and blah, blah, blah. And so we've got all this framework, which is now being to be trickled down, and they've got the banks involved, it's going to be trickled down, right? It's the same process again, right? A lot of this is coming from international sources and all of those things. There's not enough engagement in the grassroots early enough in this cycle, in my view.
Well, I mean, one thing that I suspect is that they potentially think that these issues are so complex that they are beyond the consideration or in terms of the general population. So that's why they need to just implement these things because they know better.
But that's precisely the problem, isn't it, John? They think they know better when, in fact, maybe that they've been indoctrinated by those global processes that we've described in previous videos, the World Economic Forum, United Nations, all those other sort of entities, all with their own agenda as to how to think about the future, the Davos mob, right?
Yes.
There's a bunch of big assumptions in there that then drives down into the way that things are executed locally without enough local consent, in my view.
Indeed. Now, we're going to put a link to this World Economic Forum article in the notes here in terms of our YouTube show. So one idea I would recommend to the audience is go read the original article from the World Economic Forum, but also email your politicians. Email the federal politicians, email your state politicians and say, we're not making this up. Someone wrote on the World Economic Forum about the microchipping of children. We think this is a very dangerous idea. We don't support this being implemented in Australia. We're giving you forewarning that you will face political resistance if you try this. So I mean, having worked in the political office, you get all sorts of communications all the time, and sometimes you do get random ideas that sound a little bit out there. But if someone can email a series of politicians and say, well, no, this is real, there's a link. There is someone who actually is advocating for the microchipping of children, and that we're just not making this up. We're not sort of crazy anti-vaxxers or anything like that. So we're not conspiracy theorists, even though we've been called conspiracy theorists in the past. But I think it's important that if we feel strongly about these issues, that as early as possible we are communicating with our politicians and telling them directly that whoever's pushing this nonsense overseas, we're just not going to have a bar of it.
Yep, absolutely. I think the voice of the people must be heard.
Absolutely. Now, two final things, Martin, is that there is a new aspect when it comes to microchipping, which I hadn't really contemplated until the last week as I've been thinking about this topic, and that is about microchips in pharmaceutical products. Because the Pfizer CEO has been talking about this over the last few years, and it's quite interesting. So now again, so we're going to ensure that we're going to play some original footage so that we can hear from the Pfizer CEO, and not to put words in his mouth, but there's two clips I want to play, Martin, for the audience. One is where the Pfizer CEO is speaking to Klaus Schwab this year in May, and in this short clip, he talks about waning compliance in the post-COVID era. So why don't we just play that clip?
Now, how many vaccinations do we need in the future?
It's a very good question. And I think, first of all, I think we will need vaccinations in the future, but also I'm concerned that the compliance of the population with the recommendations of the experts will not be very high. More people did the first dose, and then lesser did the second, and then lesser will do the third and the fourth. And so for that reason, we need to find a solution that makes it easy for people to get. And I think this solution, it is the number one priority is to have a vaccine that lasts a year. So once people know that it is once a year, I do it every autumn, for example, fall, I think that will improve the amount of people that are getting the vaccine.
And I think there are also certain attempts to combine it with a anti-flu vaccine.
That is another very good way to make it, to improve compliance. If someone thinks that I'm going to go to the doctor or to the pharmacy, but at least with one shot I will get two, flu and that also will increase the number. So these are the things. It's very difficult to improve the efficacy right now. It's very, very high. But what you can improve it is how convenient it is and how can last the efficacy for a longer period of time.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking, John, isn't it? Because basically he's saying there's a political agenda. How do we get compliance?
Yes.
It's remarkable.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that, so obviously he's in the business of selling drugs. He purports that he wants to improve the health of humanity. People that don't take Pfizer's pharmaceutical products are going to get sick, or if they're already sick, their sickness is going to get worse. And he says, well, how do we make people comply so that they're basically taking their drugs and Pfizer can make the money? So I found that to be quite concerning that his focus is about compliance, and obviously there are legitimate reasons why compliance in the post-COVID era would be waning. Because, to be honest, I perhaps made a whole bunch of assumptions in 2019 about pharmaceutical products, and now in 2022 I have a whole bunch of different views that I didn't prior, because I saw firsthand what happened in the last 2 years. So I mean, I think it's natural that people are more skeptical about a number of these issues. But on this issue of compliance, and now microchips. Now, there is a famous clip that we're about to play. Now, this second clip comes actually from 2018 in January, where the same Pfizer CEO talks about the inclusion of microchips in pharmaceutical products. So let's play clip number 2.
I have a question about patient engagement, and you had touched on this before. All of these advances are amazing, but even if you make the greatest drug or the greatest wearable, there's no guarantee that the patient is going to take the drug, wear the device. So how are you thinking about technology to engage the patient?
Yeah. Again, maybe I will use an example. I think it's fascinating what's happening in this field right now. I mean, FDA approved the first electronic pill, if I can call it like that. So it is basically biological chip that it is in the tablet. And once you take the tablet and dissolves into your stomach, sends a signal that you took the tablet. So imagine the applications of that, compliance. The insurance companies to know that the medicines that patients should take, they do take them. It is fascinating what happens in this field. But of course, there will be an initial cost that someone needs to invest.
And once again, the nightmare continues.
Yes. So the interesting thing about this second clip, Martin, is that when they're talking about the microchips in digestible pills and sending signals to ensure that the pill has been taken. Now, if you listen carefully in this, and again, this is the 2018 clip, the Pfizer CEO talks about ensuring that you're compliant with the insurance company. Now, this is the same issue that we've had with Suncorp. Suncorp was potentially suggesting that access to the financial system, if you're a customer, is dependent on potentially getting chipped or your interface in terms of the sector. Well, so when the Pfizer CEO is talking about, in order to get access to healthcare or health insurance, well, the health insurance company would want to ensure compliance, that you're taking the drugs so that you're not exposing the company to unnecessary risk. Because in theory, if you are sick and you are receiving benefits from a health insurance company and you're not taking the medication, well, the liability for the insurance company actually goes up. So how does the insurance company know that if you have to take a particular regimen, you're actually taking that regimen? Well, we'll put a chip in, and so that sends a signal. But again, we don't want to get into a future where health insurance companies say that in order to get the insurance, you have to take these digestible microchips. Otherwise, we're going to shut you out of the health system, because that would be a complete anathema to what I think medicine is all about. So that's obviously a concern there. But obviously, in the first clip that was played this year, the issue with compliance it goes beyond insurance companies and talks about compliance with government. So in the case of pharmaceuticals and microchips, there's this evolution of discussion about this can be helped to track what you're doing. And there's multiple parties who are interested to know what you're doing, both insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, as well as government. And whatever happened to this issue of free will, and I want to make my choices the way I want to make my choices, I want to live my life. I mean, there is a clip on the World Economic Forum where there's a speaker who says free will has now come to an end, and some even argue that it never existed. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I mean, I wake up every morning and dictate what I want to do with my life, so I think I have free will. So for people at the World Economic Forum to say that I have no free will, I'm going to be completely programmed by the elites of the world, I mean, that is a very scary proposition.
Yeah, and just another analogy, John. You know that today there's telemetry in vehicles, and telemetry in vehicles is being connected with insurance premiums and how people drive and lots of things. So there's another example there where the technology has, wheeled its way in to a financial transaction, right? And I again want to highlight that the more we allow that to happen, the less free will we actually end up with. More and more behaviours are being determined by things beyond the everyday, as it were.
Yes. I mean, so how do we ensure that? So obviously, I think we have two issues, Martin. One is that we don't want government to mandate these things, and so that's a political question. But then the other question is we don't want big business to mandate these things as well. So I think that at some point, on the second question, Parliament has to intervene in the market and basically say to private companies that there are certain things that we won't allow you to do, and we're going to put some limits as to how you can apply this technology in the marketplace. Because at the moment, whether it's about microchipping to access the financial system, there is no regulation about that. So if a bank offered a microchip, and a customer was willing to put the microchip in the hand, under the current regime, I mean that voluntary process would be allowed to occur. And now, in terms of pharmaceutical products, I mean, so the FDA has approved the use of microchips in pharmaceuticals in the United States. I'm not sure if the TGA has done anything here in Australia around that, but if anyone has any information about that, I'm fascinated to know, because I'd be highly concerned. I mean, I take various pills all the time for various ailments like Panadol, etc. So I never thought that there could be a microchip in there, but potentially I should be reading the warning labels of the products that I take, just to make sure that that what I thought I was taking is what I am actually taking.
Oh, that's right. When you stand up and start to rattle, you know something's gone wrong.
Yes, indeed. So if we can bring the show to a close, Martin, and so we've played this clip a couple of years ago, and I think it's worthwhile that we play the clip again about how are we slowly being walked into a future that we don't want to go into. And so there is a former KGB agent who was interviewed, I think, in the 1970s in the United States, and he talked about ideological subversion, psychological warfare. This is what the KGB did most of their work on. It wasn't actually espionage. It wasn't actually spying. It was, how do you slowly program a population to be compliant with your worldview? And this former agent, talked about a four-stage process, including what I think is one of the most important elements is around demoralization. So I think why don't we just play that clip so our audience is able to get a sense as to how elite propaganda actually works in real practice.
Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets used the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in the United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot.
John, that's a real wake-up call, it seems to me, because if you think over the last few years, you could argue that some of that architecture has actually been rolling out.
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously the Soviet Union was created in 1917 and with the Russian Revolution, and a lot of these techniques were implemented in Russia over many, many decades. And so people from the West have learned these techniques, and obviously elites as well, and they have refined those techniques using modern technology, like in terms of big tech. And so I think the population large. So I mean, here's the irony, Martin, is that you and I have left the matrix. So we've taken the red pill. We see the world completely differently. We see the world being manipulated using all sorts of propaganda techniques, psychological warfare, and we obviously have now someone who was a master at it saying, "This is we actually did it. We devised the strategies," and yet you still have people inside the matrix who just thinks that everything is fine and that the messages that they receive from the TV or the radio or the newspaper is perfectly legitimate content. It's all fair and balanced. There's no hidden agenda, and they're just following along on a natural evolution to a future. And you and I are trying to communicate in this show that future is dangerous. That future can be stopped. That future is being dictated to by a number of elites. And and that there is no legitimacy around these types of ideas, and that we need to basically snap out of whatever phase that the general population is in. They're just saying, we've got to say to our political leaders, but also big business, we don't want our children to be microchipped. We want to participate in democracy. We want to participate in the marketplace. We want to buy goods and services using our own money with physical cash, and we don't want to be told when to buy, how to buy, and we don't want business to basically put any conditions or to be able to monitor or surveil us. So these are some very big ideas and big controversial things that I mean, Parliament could basically clear the schedule for the rest of the year and just focus on this one topic, because there's so many elements to this that it crosses multiple areas of society at the moment that needs to be addressed, and yet our policymakers are worried about other things.
Well, John, my view is simply this, that more and more we are being treated like kids rather than adults, right? Told what to do, told how to do it. Controls are being put in place, right? Less and less ability to question and to actually have an adult-to-adult conversation. And that's partly because of the way that politicians work, partly the way because of these global themes come down, as we discussed earlier. So I think what we're about is waking people up and saying, no, you're still adults. You should still be involved and participate in the dialogue and make active decisions about things rather than passively just waiting for the heat to turn up and get cooked.
Absolutely.
John, I appreciate your time today. Very important conversation as always, and I'm sure we'll do it again soon.
Thank you very much.
Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. We'll see you next time.